The fastest way to grow is through mergers and acquisitions, but you need capital and you need brand to do that.
You talked about how it's harder to grow at the highest level. So you'll see this with large companies. I mean, you see it with law firms too, right? Like when they get really, really large, yeah, you can continue to grow organically, but if they really want to have massive growth and take over, they're going to have to start acquiring or merging with other large law firms. I don't think you see it happen as much at the lower scale, and it's probably a missed opportunity for many firm owners.
Going big is the only choice. If you think profiting $1 million a year is unreasonable, stop yourself. It's essential. You have to get to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 million at least in profit. Start getting to that indestructible wealth category. So yesterday I had my coaching session with a couple hundred of our clients, and we talked about enterprise value. And it's really fascinating that most law firm owners don't know that the bulk of their net worth is tied up in the value of their law firm, right? And if you don't understand how to control the value of your law firm as an asset, then you can't leave a legacy. You can't control your net worth. You can't control really anything. The average law firm, I think, I'm going to double check this. I think the average law firm only profits $60,000. Average profit of a law firm in the U.S.
I think we did revenue last time, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, this is not right because it says 2.66 million, but it just said the average profit per equity partner among the top 100 U.S. law firms. That's not what I asked.
Oh yeah, so that's talking big law. Yeah.
It's like nothing. When I looked at the industry report, you've seen the IBIS World report.
Mm-hmm.
The average law firm growth rate. Did we pull that up on one of the prior ones or no?
We were talking about growth rate, I believe, and revenue.
Yeah, it's like 1 or 2% now.
Tiny,
it used to be 5%. But the average annual profit, I forget where I read this and I can't find it right now. I saw somewhere was $60,000 a year, right? Now, most people don't understand multiples, like EBITDA multiples, right? So what I want to break down is just like, how do you build an asset? How do you build a law firm that's worth 10 million, 50 million, 100 million? Like what actual mathematics has to exist in the business to do that? So let's go through all the enterprise value stuff that we know. Adjusted EBITDA versus real EBITDA. That's something most people don't know.
Mm-hmm.
We'll go through multiples. Finding strategic buyers that will pay potentially an inflated multiple. How to control your multiple. I think that's pretty important, right? How the multiple changes when you get to a higher EBITDA amount, right? How multiples increase, right? Because my thought is, I can't picture a scenario where a law firm would never sell. Like I believe all law firms at some point in time should sell, right? Whether it's 100 years from now or 500 years, like it would be a travesty for a law firm to run for 50 years or 20 years and then just have to be shut down when the owner dies.
I mean, that's happened with a lot of businesses right now.
Yeah.
There's so many businesses with baby boomer ownership that are just going to fizzle out, unfortunately.
And that's why I think like 100, if you operate with the belief that 100% of law firms must sell, then you have to make your law firm sellable. It doesn't mean you have to sell your law firm right now, but you do have to make it sellable. And everything that makes a business sellable is what makes a business healthy, right? So how do you make not only your business sellable, but also your business highly valuable from an enterprise value standpoint? So we'll start with EBITDA. because that's like one of the magic numbers.
Sure.
Then we can kind of teeter between that and multiple. So EBITDA, okay, fancy word for net profit, right? Earnings before interest,
Pretty
tax,
much, yeah.
depreciation, amortization. Is there any difference between EBITDA and net profit? I've never actually looked that up.
There is a slight difference. I don't think it's exactly the same, but we'd have to look it up I don't want to misspeak on it. Earning before interest, tax.
Yeah, I've never
There's gotta
actually
be a slight
seen.
difference.
It technically says net income plus interest plus taxes plus depreciation.
Yeah.
So that assumes that it was taken out of the net profit number, which typically it's not on a P&L.
Yeah.
Net profit is total revenue minus total expenses. Very similar. It's the simplest formula ever.
Mm-hmm.
Total dollars in minus total dollars out. If a business has, write down rule of 40.
Yeah. Okay.
Because that's also a very important factor. So if a business has, now most people would think this, but if a business has zero profit, let me ask you this question actually. If a law firm has zero profit, does that law firm 100% of the time have zero value?
No.
Why?
Depends on growth rate.
Okay. So if a law firm pretend you're an investor. If a law firm grew double, so if a law firm went from $1 to $2 million in revenue in 1 year, and that law firm, that would be 100% growth, and that law firm profited nothing, how would you feel about an investment like that?
I mean, based on the rule of 40, which is the definition of taking net profit plus growth rate and adding together, you want to be 40 or higher, you're at 100, so that's well above which most are. Now, there are going to be nuances within that, right? Like I would like to see some profit ideally.
Let's slow down.
There's zero value.
Because I guarantee most people don't know what you just said there. So rule of 40, growth rate plus profit percent must be 40 or greater.
Correct.
Okay. So where rule of 40, I was going to ask where it came from, but then I'd have to search and that's going to waste time.
I can search while you do that.
Rule of 40 is one of the most evergreen truths when you talk to financially savvy individuals that know business. They all know the rule of 40, right? The smartest person in the room is going to vet your business in some way, shape, or form on the rule of 40.
It said Brad Feld was a venture capitalist who popularized the rule of 40. And as I suspected, it was a lot of these come out of like these rules that we talk about tend to be SaaS related a lot of times, right? But I think a lot of the principles can still be applicable. I think we even asked our executive coach one time, is this applicable to every industry? And the answer was yes, just might have variances.
So if a business grew by 40% year over year, and let's dumb this down so nobody misunderstands these concepts. If a business grew by 40% year over year, that means a $1 million business went from 1 million to 1.4 million in 1 year. That business grew 40% year over year. Okay. So their growth rate is 40% annually, right? Plus whatever their profit percent is. So if that same business profited 10%, right? Meaning that $1.4 million business profited $140,000,
right?
10%, that business would surpass the rule of 40, right?
It'd be 50.
And they would be at 50 on the rule of 40 because 40 plus 10, 40% growth rate, plus 10% profit percent, 40 plus 10 equals 50, right? A business that, now you could basically mix and match this a million and one ways, right? Where a business that grows 100% and lost 30% profit technically would be 100% growth rate minus 30% of a loss, negative 30% profit, and that company would be at 70 on the rule of 40 and would still be in excess of the rule of 40, right?
Correct.
So what's interesting is its profit is not necessarily it's not the end all be all. And when we were scaling SMB and we were making nothing for like 6 years, right? I was always extremely insecure about that because I never knew about the rule of 40. Like our company, the last 3 years before this year, so before 2024, from 2021 to 2022, 2022 to 2023, 2023 to 2024, our average annual growth rate was 100%, meaning we basically on average doubled our revenues 3 years in a row.
Correct.
And if you track it back, I don't include when we went from 2 to 4 million because that's like way easier to do than 4 to 8 and all the others. But like technically, if we were to bring it back 4 years, it would be 4 years would be the same average, right? And we still profited something during those years. Not much.
It was lower, but
like, I mean, it was like $300,000. Like it was nothing on the amount of revenues that we were doing for 4 years in a row, right? And our profit percent went down as we got bigger, right? But we were way in excess of the rule of 40, right? This year, we grew about 50% and still profited something like, I don't know, 11 or 12%, right?
Yeah, it's going to be 12 or higher by the end of it.
So
we've
on the rule
increased
of 40,
percentage.
we're like, what, around 60 on the rule of 40, right? So I personally, this is just something I want to share for everyone listening. I personally felt like a failure many times because I always felt deep down, we're never going to figure out this profit thing. We figured out growth, but we're never going to figure out this profit thing. But once we focused a little bit more on profit, like we did this year, we accomplished it. And because data never lies, right? It's like we were past the rule of 40 for 4 years in a row. So by just growing 50%, we did profit more, right?
Yeah.
And we still were well in excess of the rule of 40, right? And I think that like, and then the other thing is this, is like the value of your business is based on future projected cash flows, what's called unencumbered cash flow, which is basically cash flows with no leverage tied to it, right? So if you buy a business for debt, like let's say we buy a business and we finance the purchase of the business from a bank, and we buy a business for $1 million, and then we owe the bank back, I don't know, $4,000 a month or whatever for however long to repay the debt for that business we bought. Well, as long as their net profit exceeds what you're paying back from the loan that you got from the bank, as long as it exceeds that, right? Then you have free cash flow. You have a margin of unencumbered cash flow that is not repaying down your debt. And basically you're acquiring a business for free. You're actually making money while acquiring a business, right? Which is kind of similar to real estate transactions, right?
Yeah, just less than whatever your down payment would have been.
Whatever your down payment, yeah. So that's the first thing is rule of 40 is understanding that, right? Is your growth rate plus your net profit or EBITDA, the sum of those two percentages should be in excess of 40.
Correct.
Now, if you're growing 0% and profiting 0%, you're 40 points lower than the rule of 40. And that means there's something wrong with your business. If you're growing 20% and profiting 20%, it's okay. You know, you want to be in excess of the rule of 40 though.
Yeah, ideally you're going to get a higher value if you are. Now, I do think it's important to point out the split might be more important. The split between profit and the growth the desired split may be different depending on the buyer if you were to sell your business, right? So for instance, in SaaS, they could do your example, and they often do. I think that's why I'm thinking this came about. They lose money for many years, but their growth rate is massive, and they're taking investment funds and just throwing it in to keep fueling that marketing. And that's why our profits were lower in the years where we were doing 100% growth. Is our sales and marketing costs were much, much higher than most businesses would normally allocate for it. So that's where our profit was. We could have added that, there's the other add back factor where we could add that back in and say we could have theoretically had 20, 25% profit if we had not spent so much in growth. So that's where it's evaluating if you're a healthy business, because as long as you could have that profit if you didn't otherwise grow at such a rapid rate.
Yep.
So that's kind of the where they're comparing. But if you have somebody who's looking to take on your law firm, they may not want you to be, if they're a law firm owner as well and they want to absorb you, they may not want negative profit. They may want something to kind of show some health there, but they also are going to like the higher value. If one day the non-lawyer ownership expands throughout the country and PE gets involved, they're going to want to see a lot of growth rate. Profit's going to be important, but they know they can find profit later with economies of scale. So they're going to look more for growth rate, right? So I think it's the number is great either way to look at. And then depending on who your buyer is, it might kind of influence what they're going to want to see in terms of profit versus the growth rate. But growth rate always improves valuations. The higher the growth rate, for sure.
Yeah, and that's why multiple we're going to talk about next is important. So just for context with our numbers, we went from, and this is before we had attorney assistant. So, and I shared these numbers a lot through our journey on webinars and stuff. And sometimes I believe I shared our ARR number because that's what we were tracking. Now we track ARR, but we're way more important to track cash collected because there were points in time where we're like, oh, our annual recurring revenue is blah, but we didn't collect this amount of it, and this person has a delayed payment, and whatever. So, but our collected revenue that I'm looking at in our P&L for the last 4 years was $2.4 million in 2020, 4.6 in 2021. So that's almost 100% growth. That's 91%. Then this is crazy. From 2021 to 2022, we went from 4.6 to 14.2 million in 1 year. That's 208% growth. Wow. That's more than double. That's like quadruple, right? Or
you said 4,
8, 12. Yeah, so 200% growth.
That was 22, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
4, 8, 12. Yeah, so that's like 3x kind of. And then we went from 14.2 to 18.9 the next year, which is 2023. This year, we'll probably be in our SMB business, we'll probably be at 27. Attorney assistant will probably be at like 11-ish, right? So 27 plus 11 is 38, right? And this year was the easiest year of all the years. Yeah. By far. Exponentially. Sure. Yeah. And yet we grew our business by technically 18.9 to, what did I just say, 30?
38. So
38.
With combined, yeah.
18.9 to 38. That's about 20 million in growth. And this was nothing. I mean, dude, think about
much easier.
Think about when we were, when you first joined, dude, like it was like prying teeth out to grow. I mean, it was really hard to double from 2.4 to 4.6. Yeah. That was like Hercules level hard.
We were trying a lot of things. We were throwing a lot of things at the wall to see what would stick. And yeah, it was a lot of testing.
The year that we went from 4.6 to 14.2, I would say that was an easier year. I would say that's like when we merged with Andy. It was a
full merger year.
But 2023 was terrible. That was when we basically ran out of money. That's when we really got our act in check around our profits. Right?
Well, that's when the growth rates, obviously with that amount of growth rate the year before, that's when it started to catch up to us. Yeah. Right? Which is why, again, it's important to also look at that profit number, because at some point you want to see some of those profits as well to keep funding that growth, or you can't sustain that.
That was where we changed our growth rate decision. Yeah. That's where we basically became more like, let's grow smart. Yeah. Like, because, and by the way, like a lot of people don't understand this. Like, growth is not like I feel like people think like I sit in a meditative pose and just like decide that we're going to grow this fast, right? It's not, you can't just will your way into that fast of growth. You can try. The market also has to reciprocate your excitement. Yeah. The market also has to be just as excited about your company as you are, right? So as much as I'd love to say it was my ability to set goals, and no, it's also like the fact that we had a unique offer and the way that we were marketing that offer worked, and it resonated with attorneys, and attorneys said like, wow, yeah, I actually want a comprehensive 360-degree approach to business growth.
I think what was our upgrade rate that year? I mean, it was
almost
astronomical.
everyone.
It was like 80-90%
but
of our clients.
people were begging to add on additional services with us because they wanted like we listened to our clients when we merged with Andy. They wanted more social media. They wanted more SEO from us. They wanted more marketing and sales coaching, which Andy is an expert in.
Yeah, a lot of our after that merger, or even kind of right before, a lot of those initial clients of that product solution were current clients at each of our businesses that just expanded to the full service that we are then offering. Yeah.
But the reason I share this is like, imagine you were an investor, right? And I'm sharing this point not to brag. I'm sharing this point because I want every law firm owner listening to imagine if you were an investor and you looked at our numbers and you saw 2.4, 4.6, 14.2, 18.9, 30, 38 or whatever. If you saw numbers like that, what would you think about the future of our company? If you saw consistent, steady growth year over year for now 5 years in a row, from 2020 is the numbers I shared. Well, technically it would be 7 years in a row, but
yeah, you're confident about that future. You feel like there's opportunity to continue expanding. They have something working well. If I invest my money today, there's a high likelihood I'm going to continue to grow that money over the course of the next few years.
So let's repeat what Brandon just said. If an investor were to look at a company growing like that consistently year over year, they're going to think they're going to make more money off of your business in the future.
Particularly when it's organic growth like that.
Yeah.
Like organic growth with like the year after the merger, like we organically grew a massive amount that year.
Yeah.
That has even more weight.
Yeah.
So it gives the investor more confidence.
So if we were to look at the last 10 years of most law firms' profit and loss statements and financial statements, most of the time you're going to see, oh, wow, good year. Not so good year. Good year. Not so good year. Kind of okay year. Bad year. Good year. Medium year. So if you're an investor and you see a law firm with sporadic revenues year over year, what are you going to think?
Yeah, it's just like a stock, right? Like if you see a stock that's bouncing all up and down, those are people that are playing the options game on those stocks, right? They're taking some risk and betting on the upside or downside of that. But an investor who's investing for the longer term, they want to see consistent, steady growth. So they do the standard S&P 500 because they know there's steady growth rates. Yep. They have a little bit of dips here and there, but over time, you're confident you're going to get a growth. Yeah.
So I'm not just the reason I'm sharing this is because it's not just about 1 year's growth rate.
Yeah.
You hit the rule of 40 1 year is what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it's actually rule of 40 over multiple years. That becomes your data, right? Mm-hmm. That is the data that controls your net worth, controls the legacy that you're leaving with your law firm, with your business, right? Is snapshot in a 5-year time window of consistent growth and surpassing the rule of 40, right?
Anybody can have a great year. Could be a lot of outside factors that contributed to one great year.
Yeah.
Right? But to do it year over year over year over year means you have a very healthy, successful business.
Right. So this then leads to, rule of 40. So we've broken down rule of 40. Combination of growth rate and profit percent must be 40 or greater. We're now expanding rule of 40 by saying that you want to be hitting the rule of 40 5 years in a row or exceeding it preferably, right? Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, you also want to grow to a point where you get a higher multiple, right? And this is where it's like counterintuitive for people is, first of all, it's way easier to grow from, like, for example, in what I just shared, 4 million to 14 million. That is so easy to do. Way easier than going from 2 to 4 million. Way easier from going 1 to 2 million. Exponentially easier than going from 500,000 to $1 million. Mm-hmm. I mean, it just gets so much easier when you get to a point of leverage, right?
Right.
Now, I'm speaking from experience when I say that, right? If I were to talk to some smart people, they would tell you that, yeah, you're going to encounter challenges when you hit certain growth milestones, but it's always going to be easier than when you had $500 in your bank account and are working 24/7, 365 to make this dream work with
and a much
no
leaner,
resources.
yeah, much leaner team that you can't rely on. Now we have the team members that we can rely on to execute daily, so we can focus on other things. It just you leverage those resources massively when you get to this scale.
So all investing follows logic. Like I think we said last week, like I want to get into the PE game. I want to start buying companies because it is the ultimate reflection of logic. I mean, why do bigger businesses get higher multiples? Let's first explain what a multiple is. 101, right? When you sell your business, there is EBITDA, which is your net profit, right? So for example, we should probably break down adjusted EBITDA next and then multiple. Because I think you can do multiple first because then you can say how you can affect it with adjusted. So just quick teaser, like your adjusted EBITDA is going to be higher typically than your actual EBITDA, but we'll get to that in a second. So let's say your company profited $2 million. Okay. Your law firm's value is going to be based on a multiplication of your law firm's net profit multiplied by a multiple. Okay? An EBITDA multiple. So, if I'm an investor and I want to buy your law firm and you tell me you're profiting $2 million a year, maybe I'll give you a 3x multiple. Maybe
that's probably even high for a law firm. Maybe a law firm.
Maybe a little higher, maybe a little lower, right? But let's just say 3x. That means your law firm is worth $2 million in profit times a 3x multiple. Your law firm is worth $6 million. So I'll give you $6 million cash and you give me the keys to your law firm, right? So your multiple is what determines the enterprise value, the sellable asset value of your law firm. So, how do you increase your multiple, right? Well, you have growth rate, but you also have gross revenue size and profit size, right? When your top line revenue, when you're doing $100 million a year, I mean, the higher the revenue of the company, the higher the multiple. Why is that? I think, and I want to hear your thought on this, like I think it's because it's easier to grow. There's two parts of it. A $100 million company, the chance of that amount of revenue just disappearing is way lower. So it's a defensive play, right? There's also a lot more you can do with that much resource, that many resources, right? If you buy $100 million in annual revenue, you're buying a ton of staff. There's way more diversification with all the staff that you'd get, the systems you get at that level. But also, it's easier to add $20 million, let's say, to a $100 million business than it is to add $20 million to a $1 million business, because that would be 20x growth, which is unreasonable and unheard of, right? The likelihood of growing your business by $20 million is way more likely when you're doing 100 million than it is when you're doing 1 million. So while your profit percent and your growth rate might be slower at 100 million, you're not going to be growing 100% year over year when you're a $100 million company in most cases.
Very hard.
You're not going to go from 100 million to 200 million next year. Your growth rate decreases, but here's the key. The amount of net profit you generate. Okay, let's say you grow your business from 100 million to 120 million in 1 year. Who cares that it's a 20% growth rate? You grew your freaking company by $20 million. If you're profiting 20%, okay, what's 20% of 20 million?
It'd be 24. Oh, 20?
4 million.
4 million.
Right?
I thought the whole thing
That's
would be
$4 million in profit.
You increased it $4 million.
You only grew by 20%, but who the hell cares about the growth rate? You profited $4 million more in 1 year. So if I'm willing to pay more of a premium for that as an investor, a bigger company, because it's easier to grow the actual dollar amount of profit, right, than it is to do that in a small company. And there's much less risk. Of the revenue kind of just fading away. But I want to hear your thought on it.
No, I agree. And actually, I take back what I said about the 3 times multiple being high, because in my head, I was thinking revenue. But at EBITDA, I mean, that's likely a $10 million firm. So, there are that revenue markers when all of a sudden valuations change the multiples, right? 10 million. When you hit 8 figures, that can change it. Yeah. And I think the 2 biggest factors are what you just mentioned, the less risk factor as well as easier to scale at that point. And maybe it's overlaps a little bit, but I think at that point you probably have a higher share of the marketplace. So there's less, like, it ties in with the risk a little bit, but like there's less threat to it, right? Because you have a larger market share. I mean, when you look at, the race of like Uber and Lyft and all the other, like, I mean, 10 years ago, there were, or whatever the years that was, they were all thriving. There were so many other rideshare apps. I don't know if you remember that. Like, there were ones popping up left and right. And Uber and Lyft got the largest valuation because they had the highest revenue in those categories, which meant it was a lot harder for the other people to come in and start taking shares of that. And it was much easier to scale the 2 largest ones that were already there. So they get a higher multiple as a result.
So check this out. I'm going to try and articulate this. So if a law firm is doing, all right, so here's what I have right here. All right, so if you're doing about $1 million in net profit, it says in here, and this is ChatGPT, so it's not fully accurate. You're anywhere between 3 to 5x you could get as a multiple.
Okay.
As a sell.
For a small law firm or just general business? Is this specific or no?
No, yeah, I could clarify that. Do law firms? Yeah. But what it originally said was 3 to 5x for 1 million, 5 to 6x for 5 million in profit, 6 to 7x for 10 million, and then beyond there it goes up. I mean, you can get up to a 20x multiple. All right, so I just adjusted it for law firms. 2.5 to 3.5x for 1 million. So they reduced it a little bit. 5 million in profit is 3 to 4x. 10 million in profit is 3.5 to 4.5. 25 million in profit is 4 to 5x. 50 million is 4.5 to 5.5, and 100 million is 5 to 6x. That's pretty low.
Well, yeah, there's not as, I mean, they're not going to get the multiples that a SaaS or an agency or anything else would get, but.
Yeah, I think you can get a higher than that, just based on our knowledge.
Well, again, that's where I think some of those nuances that we can get into later here, we can talk about, like, those are just standards if everything's just kind of, they're probably based on like a standard, like 20% growth rate, 20% like, they usually base those, I think, on like the middle ground. It's not a weak business, but it's a solid business. So it'd be like a rule of 40 of 2020. Maybe even less than that. I don't know. But
let's see this. How would you change these multiples if the business is growing 40% year over year? Okay, so that went from this is the exact point. Ready? So now it went from 1 million in profit, just went from 2.5 to 3.5x. to 4 to 5.5x.
Oh, wow. That's a big jump. Yeah.
Okay. $5 million profit firm went from 3 to 4x to 5 to 6.5x. $10 million profit firm, this is crazy, went from 3.5 to 4.5x up to 6 to 7.5x.
Oh, so now you just doubled. The other ones were running like 50% higher on your money, what you would get. Now you're doubling it.
Yeah. So growth rate is a huge factor of the multiple that you get, especially if you can prove consistent year-over-year growth.
It's momentum, right? I mean, like anything else, like you show momentum in your firm or your business, that's an investor loves to see that.
Yep.
Or if I'm another business owner taking over it, I want to continue with that momentum.
So controlling your multiple. Now we've done a calculation on this, because not only does your multiple matter from a potentially wanting to sell perspective, but it also matters from a borrowing perspective, right? So if we wanted to borrow like $150 million to buy a ton of companies, they're going to base that on a multiple of our EBITDA, of how much we're able to borrow, right? So if I went to a bank, the bank is going to ask the same questions that an investor is. An investor is going to be a little more flexible than a bank. Like, they're going to allow us to articulate kind of a story and a vision more than a bank, whereas a bank is just going to look at your
it's cut and dry
P&L and only allow you to remove like very minimal expenses.
It's because you're essentially, it's almost like the equity in your home. Right?
Yeah.
If you want to go take a HELOC, a home equity line of credit, they're doing it based on just straight numbers. How much equity is in your home so I can mitigate my risk. If something were to go south, I can regain my money again through the equity by taking over your home.
Yep.
That's what they're doing in your business. If something were to go south, can we go to your profits of your business and recover the funds?
So regardless of how you look at it, your company's value is going to be somehow tied to your EBITDA and a multiple of that, whether you're borrowing, or another method that's been really interesting is like, if you want to buy companies, then you can actually get an investor to buy the company on your behalf, right? And like give up a part of equity of your company. So if our company is worth $100 million and I want to borrow $7 million, then I would give up 7% of our company to buy a company, to have this investor buy a company and then put it under our umbrella, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, but all that is based on, so like if I were to do an arrangement like that, how did I articulate that our company is worth $100 million, right? Because that's the difference. If let's say I could only articulate that we're worth $50 million, well then 7 million is 14% of 50 million instead of 7. So I'm giving up more equity, right?
Yep.
If my company is less valuable. Any way you look at it, I'm borrowing less, I have less leverage, I'm making less money, and my company's enterprise value is lower if my EBITDA and the multiple on my EBITDA is lower. No matter how you look at it, like it is one of the most like irrefutable truths, like, to enterprise value is your EBITDA, the multiple that you get. Now there's situations when you're doing like over 100 million in profit per year where you can get to like a 23x multiple, right? 23 to 25x. If you take a company public, you can get over a 30x multiple.
Yeah, it's probably the highest that you can get is public.
And that's just because of the liquidity of the public markets, right? It's very easy to acquire capital when you're publicly traded, right? It's way more liquid.
It's also why it's so hard to go public. Not many companies do it, but when you do, it's a big reward.
Right. So what's interesting is like if you're doing $100 million in profit and you get a 23x multiple, your company's worth $2.3 billion. So if you're doing 100 million in profit and you get a 23x multiple on your profit, EBITDA multiple, your company is worth 2.3 billion, right? So the arbitrage becomes so insane. The benefits of growing your company higher just means you get a dramatically higher multiple. So let's look at these two examples. Let's say you're profiting $1 million and you get a 4x multiple, right? At 10 million, you could get as high as 8x. It says 7.5, but let's say 8. So you get double the multiple, right? So if I'm profiting $10 million a year versus I'm profiting $1 million a year, okay? Let's say the multiple remained the same at the low level. Okay, so let's just very simply map this out. If I'm doing $1 million in profit per year and I get a 4x multiple, my company is worth what?
$4 million.
$4 million. If I'm doing $10 million a year in profit and I get a 4x multiple, my company is worth what?
40,
right? So I get a direct increase. Now, let's say my multiple didn't increase. I get an increase in value in direct proportion to my increase in profit in that example.
Right.
Okay. This is where it gets crazy. Let's pretend the multiple stayed the same at 4 million. So that number was what again?
We had 10 million at 4 times.
Yeah, so 10 million times 4 is 40 million in enterprise value. Here's how much additional value, enterprise value you get by getting to 10 million in profit. If you were at an 8x multiple, 10 million times 8 is 80 million, you have just gotten 40 million?
Mm-hmm. Additional.
40 million in additional enterprise value for your law firm just because you're at a higher net profit level. That's insane.
With that growth rate. And that, again, all those factors that build into that multiple.
Yeah. That's the difference between a 4x multiple and an 8x multiple. And that's where that's where you start building, not 8x specifically, but, when you increase your multiple, that's where your net worth starts kind of exponentially increasing.
It's like compound interest, right? Like you said, you have the factors of the revenue, the profit, and growth rate. And as you do those things, your multiple increases, which is essentially compounding your net worth.
Yeah.
On its own. Yeah.
And it's way easier. This is where it gets mind-boggling. Is once you understand the game of business, it's way easier to go from 1 million to 10 million in profit than it is to go from 0 to 1 million in profit. Mm-hmm. Way easier.
Well, and even if, let's say somebody doesn't want to try to get to that 10 million in profit, right? What would the example be on the 1 million? Just in the difference of the growth rate that we did. Because you said it was like 2.5 times, right? So you could potentially be as low as 2.5 million enterprise value to 3.5 enterprise value.
Yeah.
But it went up to what, 4 to 5?
Yeah. You're saying for 40% growth?
Yeah, when we did that 40% growth.
4 to 5.5, yeah.
Yeah, so you just potentially doubled from 2.5 million that you could sell your firm for all the way up to $5.5 million.
Yeah, just by growing
because
faster.
you were growing faster.
Yeah.
That's a huge difference. I mean, if you're looking to retire, that's a big difference in your retirement. That's 100% more money.
Mm-hmm. So then, let's go into adjusted EBITDA.
Yeah,
right?
Because now you have the factors that are already in place, which you can control some of those things.
Yeah.
But now it's essentially not about the control in the business. It's how do you pitch the business?
Yeah.
And make arguments of why it's worth even more.
Yes. So now we look at this from the perspective of buying companies, and it's when you look at this from the reverse, like look at this as though it's your own company that you're going to sell, right? If you grew your business by 100% year over year, right? Let's say that you went from 1 to 2 million in 1 year. And to do that, you had to spend 30% of that, or 40% of that $1 million or the $2 million. You went from 1 to 2 million in 1 year, and 40% of that was spent on sales and marketing, intake and marketing, right? If your law firm were to have only grown by 20% that year, how much less would you have spent on marketing, right? So, and sales and marketing. That is where you start getting close to your adjusted EBITDA. Is like you taper down your growth rate and you say, let's pretend we only grew by 20% this year. Because again, remember, all investment decisions are based on the future expected cash flows, right? So if your business went from instead 1 to 2 million, right? And it went from 1 to 1.2, which is 20% growth, how much less would you have spent on sales and marketing to only grow by 20% instead of 100%, right? Okay. Well, this is why knowing your numbers is so critically important. Right. So how much less marketing spend would you have put into your business? It's very simple to calculate this when you know your cost of acquisition.
Yep.
So basically, you would find your average client value. You would divide your average client value by that net 800K increase, right? So let's say you're like, so instead of growing from 1 to 2 million, you grew from 1 to 1.2. So you're trying to show that what is the difference between 1.2 and 2? That's $800,000. If it costs you an average of $5,000 to sign up a client, I'm sorry.
Well, what's the case value?
Yeah, if your
that?
average
$8,000 or
yeah, if your average fee per case is $8,000.
yeah,
what's that?
so if you got 800,
800,000
should be 100, but 8,000. Yeah, so it's 100.
Yeah,
So you have 100 new additional clients.
yeah,
If you were to have doubled.
correct.
So you have 100 less at 1.2.
If the average fee that you receive per case is $8,000 and you didn't grow by that additional 800 grand, then 800 grand divided by 8,000
is 100 less clients.
you would have signed up 100 less clients.
Correct.
There you go. Yeah. Okay. So then the question is, how much does it cost for you to get one client?
Exactly.
That's your cost of acquisition. The way you figure out that number is you take your entire year's sales and marketing budget for the whole year, and you divide it by the number of clients you signed up.
Yep.
That's your cost of acquisition, right? Okay, I signed up 300 clients this year. I spent, what would that be? Let's just say I spent like $400,000 to get those 800 clients. What would that be? What did you do?
Well, I did like if it was like a $2,000 cost of acquisition. So I just said that'd be $200,000 you could take off of your P&L.
Let's say it's 400.
400 clients?
Let's say
$400
let's say we spent $400,000 on sales and our $2 million firm spent 400 grand on sales and marketing. And for that, I signed up 250 clients.
$1,600.
$1,600. So that means my cost of acquisition is $1,600.
Right.
So now let's pretend that I got 100 less clients. It would be $1,600.
160,000.
So in that example, you would add back $160,000 in profit.
Yep.
And you would say, hey, if you were to buy my law firm today, you would not need to plow this much in sales and marketing going forward. Therefore, you could profit X more. You could profit $160,000 a year more if you just grew the firm by 20% next year.
Right.
That's the case you're trying to make. That's one part of adjusted EBITDA. Then there's, okay, we signed up these 100 additional clients that we didn't need to in excess of 20% growth. 20% growth is your baseline, right? Mm-hmm. You're trying to establish a 20% growth baseline.
That shows a healthy growth. It's consistent, healthy growth is 20%.
So then from there, who did I hire on my team that I otherwise wouldn't have hired if we signed up 100 less clients? Who wouldn't have I hired in intake? Who wouldn't I have hired as attorneys, support staff, paralegals, right?
Right. Yeah, maybe you need, for every 50 clients, you need one attorney in a year to do those cases.
Yep.
So you hired 2 attorneys, maybe an additional paralegal, another intake person.
Yep.
In addition to the money you spent on marketing.
And then you kind of subtract out whatever their salaries are. Let's say one of the attorneys is 200 grand, the others is 200 grand. That's $400,000 you add back to your profits. So now you went from what seemed like very low profit to now you're profiting, 400,000 plus 160,000 more, $560,000 more in profit.
Yep.
Now we could go down. Now owner's salary is another big category of adjustments, right? Like if you're paying yourself, if you're doing personal expenses through your business which is a no, you shouldn't be doing that. But if you are, you need to pull those out. If you're paying yourself in a weird way, if you're paying yourself an inflated
too much
salary, you have to replace that with what's called a replacement salary. If you were to hire your replacement, how much would you pay them? So if you're CEO of your law firm, could you hire someone for $200,000 to be CEO of your law firm?
Right.
And you're paying yourself 400, there's another 200 grand. 400 minus 200 is a net increase that you otherwise wouldn't have paid if someone else took over your company.
Then it could be other expenses of things that the new owner one-time expenses. You had to purchase a building, you do whatever, a down payment, whatever it may be. But also things that, we put our professional development in there. Mm-hmm. If a new owner came in, they don't have to continue professional development if they're only looking to grow at 20%.
Yeah.
So we added that back in.
Yeah. So, and again, we add this back in. The reason why knowing your adjusted EBITDA is so important is, again, because we want to buy companies and we want to partner with companies, just like I did with Andy, just like I did with Attorney Assistant, right? Because we want to do that, we need to know our company's value. Because if someone were to merge with us in some capacity, the percent of our entity that they're going to get is based on our company's value, right?
So we want to get it as high as possible on our end.
Yeah. And, I think that it's also the right thing to do, because you can't base a company's value when you're plowing so much back in reinvestment for growth. It's just not fair, because it violates Rule 40. So another simple way, a much simpler way to do this is this is like way simpler, is literally look at your Rule of 40 and then invert it so that it's 20% growth. So this is a very simple way to do this. Let's say you're on 50 of the Rule of 40, meaning you grew by 40% last year and profited 10%. 40 plus 10, it means you're at 50 on the Rule of 40. A very simple way of doing this is just to pretend instead of you grew 40%, you grew 20%. So instead of 40 plus 10, now you've only grown 20%, and that additional 20 now gets put in profit.
So you get 30% profit.
So you're able to say, oh, I'm actually not a 10% profit company. I'm a 30% profit company, because if I was only growing 20%, I would have profited 30% on the Rule of 40, right? Now, if you get this right, your add backs are probably going to about equal that.
Yeah.
You're gonna probably, you shouldn't change your Rule of 40 is like the rule of thumb. You can't show someone your business and you be at 20 on the Rule of 40 and then adjust it and now you're at 80 on the Rule of 40. Right? Yeah. So the math doesn't work out. So it's got to be the sum of growth rate and profit should still be the same number.
Yeah, and it's because, again, these are things that are legit things you could add back in. It's legit things that were contributing to your growth.
Yeah.
If you're just trying to find anything under the sun to throw in there, you're going to see a difference, and then you're doing too much.
Yeah.
But ideally, they came out to about the same.
So, but this is it. This is your net worth. Like, this is literally the enterprise value of your law firm and the percent ownership you have of your law firm. Enterprise value, again, is that sellable asset value of your law firm. This is your borrowing leverage. This is your acquisition leverage. And if you want to sell your law firm, it's your cash sale price leverage. I mean, it's everything. It's literally everything. And if I were to talk to a couple hundred law firm owners, I would, most of them would never have heard about EBITDA, adjusted EBITDA, multiples. Another thing is like finding strategic buyers, right? Like getting bought by a competitor that hates you is like, could be a really good thing, because then they'll pay an emotional price for that, right?
Or it's that threat again, right? So if you're in a market and let's say you're an up and coming PI firm and you're really starting to put a dent in the big players' side in that market, they may be willing to pay a much higher multiple just to get you out of the equation, just to take you off the market, because they know long term they're going to reap way more rewards by not having a big competitor, and maybe you're their only really true competitor in that market. So, people do that all the time in businesses where they want to swallow their competition. They will pay whatever it takes to get them off the market.
Yep. And this is the last thing I want to leave off on is like the power of mergers and acquisitions, right? Because ultimately, as we went through, like, your law firm's valuation and multiple increases as your profit increases, right? So when you go from $1 million in profit to 10 million, we went through that whole equation, right?
Yep.
You can buy revenue and have the same effect as growing your firm organically as well. There's organic and inorganic growth. Organic growth is grassroots growth that you did internally in your law firm without adding another company's revenues to your profit and loss statement. That's inorganic growth. That's growth through acquisitions, right? So let me just explain inorganic growth. If your law firm's doing $10 million a year, okay, and a competitor law firm is doing $10 million a year, both are doing $2 million in profit, and you merge those two companies together, now you're doing 10 plus 10, 20 million in revenue, and 2 plus 2, 4 million in profit, right?
Yep.
If you have a law firm that's doing 10 million in revenue and 5 million in profit, the same thing applies. If both companies are doing that the same amount, you go from 10 and 5, 10 and 5 to 20 and 10, right?
And no matter what the number, they don't have to be
Combined.
the same. I mean, it's just you just add them together. You basically add those two together, and that's how much growth you had over that year. But it's all inorganic because you did it through the merger.
So that is the fastest way. The fastest way to grow is through mergers and acquisitions, but you need capital and you need brand to do that. For someone to want to merge with you, you either need capital or brand or a mix of both, right? Like you gotta be doing something in your market. You can't just to merge with, to have two firms that are profiting $60,000 a year merge is probably a waste of time, right?
Well, it's why too. You talked about how it's harder to grow at the highest level. So you'll see this with large companies. I mean, companies like Groupon in their heyday, they were acquiring tons of other businesses.
Oh, yeah.
Some that were direct competitors, some that were ancillary, complementary type businesses, because they were already so massive at a certain point that the only way to grow at mass scale that they wanted to was through acquisition. You see it with law firms too. Big law, you see it all the time, right? Yeah. Like when they get really, really large, you can continue to grow organically, but if they really want to have massive growth and take over, they're going to have to start acquiring or merging with other large law firms. And it happens all the time at the large scale. I don't think you see it happen as much at the lower scale, and it's probably a missed opportunity for many firm owners.
But it's so powerful because look at what Andy and I did.
Yeah, 100%.
That year that we went from 4 to 14.8, that year, I mean, most of that was just from the shared resources of us merging our companies together. And we were competitors. But prior to that, we were technically competitors, right? Although we didn't really treat each other that way.
But we had the inorganic growth, and then we had massive organic growth as the benefit of that merger. Yeah. On top of it. So
that's where you get those unreasonable multiples. Right. If you can prove that you can acquire companies and that's inorganic growth, and you can apply an organic growth model to the companies you acquired, which we'd call like an organic growth playbook, that's where you start getting insane multiples. Right. 15, 20, because then you've diversified your growth system. You're showing an investor, hey, I can grow grassroots, and when I buy companies, I can also grow them as fast as we've grown our own company.
It's also because that goes back to that compounding factor, right? Like anybody, I say anybody, I mean like investors or whatever, they can go out and acquire companies too. Yeah. Right. But they're not necessarily the ones who are going to grow it organically. Yeah. So they're like, wow, if we can inorganically buy businesses or other law firms, and we're going to also count on the fact that this is a strong organically growth-minded company that's going to be able to take our new investment and also scale it. Yeah. Big upside.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like, what can you do today to start embarking on this is like, just, you got to start thinking bigger. You got to understand that like playing it small is stealing from your own pocket. It's stealing from your family's ability to have a legacy, for you to leave a legacy for them. Going big is the only choice. It's the only choice for your net worth. It's the only choice to create real value. You got to go big. And going big is literally just skills. Like if you think that profiting $1 million a year is unreasonable, stop yourself. Like it's not unreasonable. It's essential. You have to get to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 million at least in profit, at least to 10 million in profit per year to really create, like, start getting to that indestructible wealth category.
Well, the one other thing I just want to add, there are other factors that are probably smaller to some degree, but there are other factors that can play into your multiple as well. So having streamlined processes, technology, right? I don't care if I go into a company, if I went into a law firm, say I was another law firm and I was looking to acquire another one, and they were doing $1 million in EBITDA, might look great. But if they're doing everything with paper files and running their CRM in an Excel spreadsheet, like that's going to be a big headache to me. So I'm probably going to offer less than that. Where if everything's streamlined and we can mesh the systems together very quickly or whatever, that's much more attractive. And an acquisition might be a little bit different for what I'm about to say, but the name. What are your thoughts on the name? Because everyone always uses their own name, right? Which is great when it's just you. But, I guess if somebody were to acquire it and merge it into their firm, it might not be as big of a deal because they'll say, well, eventually we'll just brand it our name.
Yeah.
But if it's somebody that's just been an attorney at somebody else's firm and they don't want to start a firm from scratch, they want to buy somebody's firm, they don't want to buy somebody's name.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
and it's less scalable at that point. So what are your thoughts on that?
All right. So McKinsey and Company, that's a name.
Yeah.
But the name has stood the test of time. The name probably has core values behind it. It's its own living mechanism. It's its own living entity. So I actually don't.
But do you think the and co makes it more broad versus when you say law offices of Joe Smith?
Yeah.
Now it's all on Joe Smith, and they always use first names too a lot of times.
Yeah. Yeah. I think first name definitely pigeonholes you a little, but I don't think if. That would be like saying acquiring Morgan & Morgan would be the name brand would turn me off of that.
But that's because they have so much brand value in that name.
That's what I'm saying.
The average person does not have
That's
that.
why it's like equity. No, but some people do have an equivalent, much smaller level, but an equivalent level of trust built in their local market behind their name. And so what I would say is it wouldn't just be black and white. You have a name-based firm? We're not interested, or we're gonna ding your valuation half. I think there's more to it. If there's core values and if there's a feeling this name can live on with just a little bit of changes and a rebrand, just instead of John McKinsey, removing the word John, just saying McKinsey and Company, just slight rebrand, as long as it feels like it can live on its own, right? McDonald's, that's a last name, right? McDonald's has lived on, right? There's, it'd be interesting to see. There's a painting company in this area. It's called John Byrne Painting.
Never seen it. Okay.
And I see it's all in my local area. I see them everywhere, signs in people's lawns. It's just I don't really I don't know if John Byrne is the guy I'm going to talk to. I don't really care. If I became aware of John Byrne as a painting company, and I go in Google and I see amazing 5-star reviews. Joseph, not John, Joseph handled me so well at John Byrne Painting. John Byrne Painting blew my mind. I'll probably still call them then, even though Joseph was the person who blew their mind, not John Byrne.
I would agree from the perspective of the consumer. I think maybe where it comes into play is if, in my second example, of somebody who doesn't want to start a firm, they just want to buy a firm.
Yeah.
They have to be okay saying, I'm going to operate this firm under that person's name for the next 10 years because they have so much local value.
Yeah.
Which I think most people don't want to do. But if you're humble enough to do that, you're probably going to get much bigger upside.
I think it's a multitude of factors, like you said. If that Joe Schmo law firm had the best systems ever, had an amazing scalable internet marketing strategy, grew 100% year over year for 5 years in a row, I probably wouldn't care as much, right? But if it was just a mom and pop law firm that hasn't really grown and it's all been word of mouth and the name is actually a reflection of a poor marketing strategy and
there you go.
They're not growing, then it's it's a problem, right?
Yeah. Then you're probably getting less than some of those the valuations we said in the beginning, the multiples.
Oh yeah.
It could actually drop.
It would
below
probably
that.
just be, you'd have to pay someone to buy your company. Negative.
Please take this off my hands.
Yeah. And then the common questions that someone's going to ask you is they may not actually ask this for a small business, but I know I'd ask this. When was the last time the owner has been on a sales call? Right? For me, the answer would be 4 years. There's no sales dependence in this company at all.
Well, maybe not even just sales, but anything. What would happen if I removed, if you're the law firm owner and I want to buy you, what happens if you went away for 3 months?
Yeah.
Is your firm going to be on fire when you get back, or are you going to be okay?
What happens if you're removed from case management? What happens if you're removed from intake? What happens if you're removed from high-level decision-making? What happens if you're removed from this? That's what I'm going to try and feel out. But the data is going to show all that. The data, it's once you get to a certain level of sustained year-over-year growth, the only way to maintain that is through owner independence, not owner dependence. It's very rare that owner dependence doubles a business 5 years in a row. It's typically team, it's interdependence. The team then becomes a self-multiplying entity, and that's what creates breakthrough growth years and years and years in a row. So that's how you build net worth. That's how you turn your firm into an enterprise valuable asset. This is a top priority. I mean, this is why learning about business is like, and mastering, not just learning about, but mastering business is like the only solution to this stuff. I mean, this is your life. This is your net worth. This is where you spend the majority of your time running your law firm. Might as well finish what you started. Might as well actually turn this into a business that runs with or without you. And one day get a $50 million check for your law firm. I promise you, it's not as hard as you think. Just because you can't do it now doesn't mean you can't do it. I would venture to guess everything you've learned about the law is probably way more complicated than what you need to learn about business. I mean, business is like simple math, simple systems, hiring processes. They've all been written about. The complex stuff that you handle in the law is, I could never do it. That's for sure. It's just way simpler. So today's the day. Dominate business. Build some enterprise value. And I'm going to say it. Get rich. All right. I'll see you soon.